house upon a rock, and the rains came a-tumbling down.
Welcome to our Bible study for February 5th. I am filming out on my porch on a rainy day, and that is for a reason, and you will hear that when we get to the scripture. I'm not sure that our house was built on the sand, but it was definitely built on flat ground, and it has rained most of January, and now we're in February and it's raining, and the groundhog has seen his shadow, and there's 6 more weeks of winter, and it may be we may be done for. You may can tell behind me we are really wet and muddy out there in the pastures, and Jesus has perhaps a bit to say about this. We are continuing in the Sermon on the Mount. We will actually finish the Sermon on the Mount today, and I'm going to begin with the 13th verse and read through the end of the 7th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide, and the road is easy that leads to destruction, and there are many who take it. For the gate is narrow, and the road is hard that leads to life, and there are few who find it. Beware of false prophets, who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns, or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will know them by their fruits. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name? Then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Go away from me, you evildoers. Everyone then who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like the wise man who built his house on rock. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on the house, but it did not fall because it was founded on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like the foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Now when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he taught as one having authority, and not as their scribes. Well, this is a passage really all about choices, and it ends the Sermon on the Mount, and Matthew ends by saying, thus Jesus ends this teaching, and he's going to do that 4 more times in his gospel. And what Matthew is doing is charting out Jesus as the new Moses. And just as Moses brings the 5 books of the law, the 5 books of the Torah to the people, Jesus is bringing 5 different bodies of teachings, if you will, to the people. And this concludes the first one. And it is a passage about choices. I love it when I am working with our daycare children in the chapel at church. We do chapel 1 day a week, and I just love our teachers. They are well-trained and wonderful teachers, and one of the things that they have learned or been trained is to help the kids make good choices. And so when 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds are kind of rolling around and not doing exactly what they're supposed to do, rather than yelling at them, which is probably the what they want to do, the kind of the obvious reaction, they say instead, friends, are we making good choices? And they're really helping the kids recognize that they have a choice to do whatever it is that they need. They can do the right thing or the wrong thing, and they also are being a very good model for the kids, and we'll come back to that at the end. When my children were in elementary school themselves, their principal, Mr. Brugel, every day on the PA, when he would be doing the announcements in the morning, he would end it with something along the lines of, go and have a great day today. The choice is yours. And he was telling the children, and that's kind of been a family thing ever since then in our family, but telling them they have power. If you have a great day, it is somewhat dependent on what other people do or what things may happen to you or whatever, but really having a great day is largely within your own power. You have the choice to do the things to make sure you have a great day. Well, of course, that's kind of what Jesus is saying as well. Maybe a negative example, but another one that comes from my children's childhood is the movie The Little Mermaid, and Ursula the Sea Witch, as she gives the Little Mermaid, Ariel, a choice. And let's just for a minute or so watch a little clip from that movie.
Now, here's the deal. I will make you a potion that will turn you into a human for 3 days. Got that? 3 days. Now listen, this is important. Before the sun sets on the 3rd day, you've got to get dear old Princey to fall in love with you. That is, he's got to kiss you. Not just any kiss. The kiss of true love. If he does kiss you before the sun sets on the 3rd day, you'll remain human permanently. But if he doesn't, you turn back into a mermaid, and you belong to me.
No, Ariel!
Have we got a deal?
If I become human, I'll never be with my father or sisters again.
That's right. But you'll have your man. Life's full of tough choices, isn't it?
In our family, we sometimes say life's full of difficult choices, isn't it? And it's true. Life is full of difficult choices. And one of the things that all three of these illustrations I've just made tell us is that choices have consequences. What Ariel chooses is going to have consequences. I can choose to have a great day or not. A 3-year-old can choose to make good choices or not, and all those choices have consequences. Remember when I was a child, one of the books I just loved was the Guinness Book of World Records. And it was fun just to flip through the book and read through. And a couple of them that really stuck with me and stick with me to this day were the woman that they said was the world's greatest miser. And I went and had to look her back up. Her name was Hetty Green. And in the 19-teens or maybe the early 20s, her parents died and left her with a fortune, which would have been worth in today's dollars somewhere around $100-some million. So she was incredibly wealthy. And yet she was an incredible miser, and she would use a tea bag 8 or 10 times, and she told her the people that would to wash her clothes only to wash the hem of her dress because that was the only thing that was really dirty, and she would wear her clothes, including her undergarments, until they absolutely fell apart before she would find more. And all of that is fine, I guess. If you want to be a miser, that's fine, but she had a son, and he developed an infection in his leg, and she went looking for a free clinic. Now, here's a multi-millionaire looking for a free clinic, and it took her so long to find somebody with a free clinic to treat her son that he ended up losing his leg. So choices have gigantic consequences, and sometimes the consequences on other people. Another one from the Guinness Book that always amazed me was the person with the longest fingernails. And back then, I remember the picture was a woman and her fingernails curled around kind of. But if you look on the internet today for the person with the longest fingernails, the current record holder is a woman named Diana Armstrong. Interesting name, Armstrong. She almost needs to have strong arms because her fingernails, her longest one is one of her thumbs. It goes more than 4 feet down, but all of her fingernails just go straight down to the floor. And so in the picture, she's standing there like this, and her fingernails are just going all the way to the floor, and they're presenting her with a plaque, and she can't accept the plaque with her hands because her fingernails are so long. And she says that she can't drive anymore, and she really can't pick things up, so she's learned to pick things up with her feet. And so she says, if I drop a dollar bill on the floor, I can pick it up with my feet, but if I drop a coin on the floor, it just has to stay there. My feet aren't able to pick it up. And she has to rely on her children and her grandchildren to do all kinds of things for her. Well, choices have consequences. They have consequences for her, but they also have consequences for other people as well. Well, Jesus in this passage is telling us life's full of difficult choices, isn't it? And he's warning us that choices have consequences. He says to choose the narrow gate. And there he is likely talking about Jerusalem. Jerusalem, like many of the cities in that day, was a fortified city. It had walls all the way around it. To this day, there are walls all the way around Jerusalem. And there are gates at various portions in the city, and those would be gates that they would have to defend in the case of an attack. And so they had to be very strong gates, but they also had to be wide enough for people to come in, and for chariots and horses and everything that needs to come in has to be able to come in. And so they designed them to be wide enough for that, but also had to design them to be defensible. But then there are also very, very small entrances, and often they would be at the base of the gate and actually be a very, very narrow staircase going up to get into the city. And again, this was to make it defensible, but also to give people the chance to get in and out of the city during normal times, having to walk all the way around to one of the few gates that were there. If the city were under attack, they could either just shut that off, that narrow way, or if attackers were coming up a narrow set of stairs, single file, they would be easy to pick off, of course, as they made their way up. And Jesus is saying in the spiritual world, the spiritual life, there are a lot of wide gates. And everybody flows in and out of those gates. Those are the easy gates. But he says the gates that lead to life are narrow, and almost literally you can't just kind of be swept in with the crowd. You have to choose first to find it. He says some can't find it. These would be a lot harder to see, of course, than the bigger gates. And then you've got to pretty much choose to take the effort to go up that thin, narrow, maybe even kind of dark and spooky passageway to get into the gate. It's not following the crowd. And that's really important, because the choice we make depends. He says that wide gate leads to destruction if you just follow the crowd, but the narrow gate leads to life. He then says one of the ways that we may find ourselves being swept in through that wide gate is if we follow false prophets. And he warns that there are false prophets, and he tells us to watch out for them. And he says there is a test that you can use to determine whether a prophet is a false prophet or not, and that is by their fruit. And it's very interesting, because he doesn't say that it is their charisma. Oh, wow, he or she just can speak so well. It's not their power, the works of power that they can do. Even if they've cast out demons, he says, if you don't know me, then you are an evildoer, and they are an evildoer. It isn't whatever success that they have. Sometimes in the modern world, as well as in the ancient world, the people that can gather the most people around them are thought to be the true people. Why would people follow this person if they can't gather them around, whether that as a politician or a preacher or whoever? But Jesus says, beware, just because they're successful doesn't necessarily mean that they are true. And I think it's important to recognize that even if they have the right doctrine, in some ways the Pharisees and the scribes had the right doctrine, if you will, but they didn't have the right fruits. I think in our age, as well as in that age when Jesus was, we also need to be aware that just because somebody's in your tribe doesn't necessarily make them a true prophet. Many people are warning that in our culture in the United States, we're slipping into tribalism, whether it's political tribalism or religious tribalism or ethnic tribalism. We kind of want to associate with people who are like us, and we assume that people who are like us are the righteous ones, and the people who are not like us are the evil ones. And Jesus says, no, it's not just because they're part of your tribe, no matter what your tribe is, but do they bear fruit? Now, Paul has a lot to say about fruit. He tells us that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. But even more importantly, or maybe more powerfully, in 1 Corinthians 13, Paul, almost echoing Jesus here, says, if I can speak in the tongues of people and of angels, if I just have eloquent speech, but I don't have love, I'm just a noisy gong. And if I have all faith, even enough faith to move mountains, but I don't have love, it does me no good. And even if I give up everything I have and I surrender my body to the flames, if I don't have love, I gain absolutely nothing. Is the fruit really there, Jesus says? And following that fruitful life, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, is a much harder way than just going with the crowd and going with what is easier, what comes more naturally. And yet Jesus promises us that that's what leads to life. Then he moves into the idea of building your house on the rock or on the sand. And it's important, I think, that we recognize here that Jesus really is preaching to the converted. Will Willimon was the chaplain at Duke when I was there. He later became a Methodist bishop. And he wrote a book that I think was titled Preaching to the Converted. And the purpose of his book for preachers was be aware that when you are preaching on an average Sunday, the vast majority of people who are there are already converted. They're already followers of Jesus. And so every single sermon cannot be a sermon summoning people to initial faith in Christ. That's important, and that needs to be a part of our preaching, and it needs to be a part in some ways of every sermon. But we are actually preaching to the converted. Well, that's what Jesus is doing here as well. He's not trying to convert people to his way. The people that have gathered on the mountain to listen to him at one level or another are absolutely his followers, and he's preaching particularly to his disciples. And so he isn't saying simply, as long as you have faith in me, then you're done. You've already followed the narrow path. But he's saying you need to hear and do what I say. And if you do that, that is building your life on the rock. So you've already made the decision to commit to me. Now start building your life and make sure that you build it on the rock. And the Sermon on the Mount is the initial teaching that Jesus has for us for how we build it on the rock. And it is challenging because he's just told us in the previous chapter that it's not enough just to say that I have kept the commandment, thou shalt not murder. But if I've ever been angry with a brother or a sister, angry enough that I'm just enraged, that I really wish their death, then that already is, I am guilty of murder. It's not enough to say, well, I've never committed adultery, but if I have lust in my heart, then I've already committed adultery. It is in that previous chapter that he says, if someone strikes you on the cheek, turn the other cheek, that we aren't to retaliate. And that is so hard because our natural instinct is to strike back. If you hit me, I'm going to hit back harder. And Jesus says, no, not in my kingdom, not in my way. Jesus says it's easy to love those who love you. I want you to love your enemies. And then he concludes that whole thing with that whole section there with the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And that sounds wonderful, and we've said that since we were children. That's really hard to do. Because we often want to do unto others for whatever is best for us. And we want to do unto others the way maybe that they did unto us, not the way that we would have them do unto us. And yet Jesus calls us to all these things. In the last lesson we learned, Jesus is calling us to give and to pray and to fast. And I really think those three practices are ways that we actually get ourselves further into a right relationship with Jesus when we do it in the proper manner, as we talked last week. And when we do that, then Jesus is molding us and shaping us to be able to hear and do those things that he's calling us to hear and do. And he says that if we do that, we will find ourselves in the kingdom of heaven. And it's vitally important for us to recognize that Jesus sees the kingdom of heaven as here, in the here and the now, just as Jesus is absolutely present with us now. We don't wait to see Jesus or wait to be in the presence of God. We are fully in the presence of God right now. Now, our eyes, our ability to be completely aware of that is not, we don't have that fully developed. That only happens in the afterlife, but that does not mean that Jesus is not completely with us now. And so when we do these things, we are more fully in the kingdom of heaven. And so we are called to build our lives on the rock, so that when the rains come and the storms come and the winds come, we will be able to withstand all of those things. And so I will close with how I opened, with reminding you what our daycare teachers say when they tell the children, let us hear this as well. Friends, are we making good choices? And then let me call to your attention that not only are the daycare workers asking really good questions, but they're being really good models. They're not yelling at the kids, abusing the kids or whatever in order to make them behave, but they are, with their gentle tone and their loving concern, they are being a good model for the kids as well. Jesus not only models for us, but Jesus even goes a step further. Jesus empowers us. And so, friends, are we making good choices? And the first good choice we can make is to make sure that we are letting Jesus empower us. We can do that, of course, because, as I've already said, God is with us.
The wise man built his house upon the rock. The wise man built his house upon the rock. The wise man built his house upon the rock, and the rains came a tumbling down.